Welcome. Thank you for being here this afternoon. For those I don't know, my name is Katie Blake, and I'm a regional conservationist at Husted. We're a regional conservation nonprofit based in Redding, Connecticut. I also serve as the Hudson to Housatonic RCP, H2H, as it is known, as their partnership coordinator. And Husted is the host partner organization for H2H. It's a privilege to get to support the incredible conservation work that's happening in the region, and an honor to get to know all of you. I want to thank the H2H Advisory Committee and partners for their guidance and support in pulling this event together today. And I want to thank our speakers for taking time from their work to be here with us and to share information on various conservation funding opportunities. And I want to thank all of you for being here. My next slide, yes. So today's program is part of our annual winter all-partner meeting, which is typically held virtually. There is a lot to tour in the world of conservation funding. So this meeting is going to happen in two parts. So today's program, and then next week is part 2 on March 13th from 4 to 6 p.m. So at a different time slot. And we'll get to the program in just a minute. But first, I'd like to orient us all to the H2H partnership. Given the timeliness of this topic, conservation funding, and the diversity of funding programs that we'll be presenting today and next week, I extended today's invitation to these two meetings to leaders outside of H2H who are part of other conservation partnerships in the Northeast. So we have some new faces on our call. But whether you are a new partner with H2H or you've been around with us since the beginning or just attending as a guest, I thought it would be helpful to give a little background on who we are and what we do. So H2H is an interstate, two-state regional conservation partnership, or RCP, that extends from the Hudson River of New York to the Housatonic River in Connecticut, and we're bound to the south by Long Island Sound. We're a watershed-focused and oriented partnership given our geography and the abundant resources, water resources that support our natural ecosystems, recreation, and provide drinking water for millions of people in the region. And this cross-state partnership works to increase the pace and capacity for land protection and stewardship to support connected habitat for diversity of wildlife and swaths of open space and clean waters for our communities to enjoy. And at H2H, we have a core group of about 50 partners. This is not everybody. Land trusts, municipalities, nonprofits, state agencies who work together within a collaborative framework towards a shared regional vision for the landscape for all people and nature to enjoy. And our mission is to advance the pace and practice of regional land protection and stewardship from the Hudson to the Housatonic by collaborating across boundaries to enhance the connection between people and nature. And there are so many incredible projects, initiatives, ideas, activities that have come through partners working together in this region. And I don't have time to even highlight all of the accomplishments, but in a minute, I'll mention a few announcements and some upcoming opportunities in H2H this spring, where we'll be revisiting these accomplishments and creating more opportunities to support partners and helping to advance the work that you're doing in the region. Now, I just want to pan out for a minute from our region and highlight that H2H is one of over 50 RCPs in the Northeast. And so here we are down here, of course. And in my role at Husted, I wear many hats, but I support this network of leaders across the Northeast in a variety of ways, developing programming, supporting collaborative fundraising efforts, and leading various landscape scale conservation initiatives, and organizing peer exchange opportunities to share lessons across the region. Things our RCP are dealing with, other RCPs throughout the region are dealing with as well. And I mention this because there's a great opportunity for H2H partners to engage with this wider network. And there are lots of opportunities throughout the year, but the flagship is this peer exchange event that we have in the fall called the Regional Conservation Partnership Network Gathering. that HISED hosts, and it's a free one-day conference that brings together people advancing collaborative landscape conservation along with allies and advocates for this work. And the save the date isn't even out there, but you are all in the know because I'll let you in on the details. November 6th at UMass Amherst is the date for the program this year. So stay tuned because end of the month we'll be getting that out to our partnership. So now for a few H2H news items and updates that I wanted to mention. H2H will be represented at the upcoming 80th Annual Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Conference in April in New Hampshire. I'll put some more information in the chat in just a second, but H2H partner Bud Ververka of the Mianus River Gorge and I have put together a symposium on the conservation power of RCPs. And highlights of that session will include presentations on coordinated black bear monitoring in the H2H region and the now international pollinator pathway program. And these are both projects, initiatives that grew out of partner work that happened in the H2H partnership. So I'm hearing from partners about an interest in gathering to do some visioning and regional planning around conservation priorities. And so we're going to kick off an opportunity to hear from all of you about what you'd like to see and how we can support your work. And our in-person all-partner meeting will be on May 22nd, where we'll have kind of jumpstart those conversations. Additionally, H2H is one of 3 participating RCPs in a collaborative regional conservation partnership program grant, the RCP program, which you're going to hear about actually in just a second. It's called the Uplands to Lowlands Climate Resilient Core and Connectors RCPP. It was awarded over $6 million to support land conservation and restoration projects, as well as outreach and engagement on a regional scale throughout 3 partnerships. And so H2H is one of those partnerships. And what that means for us is pollinator pathway conservation partners are going to be getting some support for riparian buffer restoration in the region. And there will also be a training opportunity for any H2H partner interested in receiving training on how to teach eBird, so a way to engage landowners or members of your organization in connecting with nature through birds. And so that training we're expecting to be next year, spring 2026. And then finally, just a reminder, we have a listserv, so any events or news that you want to share, you can put in our listserv. It is moderated, but I try to get to messages within a day. It's also how we get out information about these programs that are partnership-wide. Yeah, so very easy directions on how to sign up. We'll put that in the chat as well. And finally, we have a few upcoming programs and events. Again, next week is the second part of today's program, which will feature 4 additional funding sources for conservation. That's March 13th, 4 to 6. I just mentioned our all partner meeting, our in-person meeting is going to be held May 22nd. Stay tuned. We just set the date and I'll get more information out in our listserv on that. We have some equity training opportunity coming up too. It's a 3-part series in creating group agreements for your organization. And we'll learn about what this foundational work of creating working agreements is, why they matter, and help prepare you for developing these within your own organization. So it's a train the trainer. And this program came about to help us reach our goals within H2H, to help us better understand how we could be a more diverse, equitable, inclusive, and just partnership. And finally, I already mentioned this, but the RCP Network Gathering is being held on November 6th up at UMass Amherst. Right, so for the program portion, presentation portion of our program today, pleased to kick that off. in developing this program, we wanted to focus on funding opportunities relevant to collaborative partnerships and specifically to our region. And we also wanted to bring in opportunities at different scales of service. So between today and next week, we'll hear about a couple of national programs. We'll hear about some more regional opportunities relevant to the H2H region, and we'll hear some more local opportunities focused in Connecticut or just for New York. And so for today, we're going to hear about the USDA Regional Conservation Partnership Program, the Network for Landscape Conservation Catalyst Fund, the Open Space Institute's Land and Climate Grant Program, and some local opportunities through the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. So each presenter or presenter team will have about 20 minutes to share information about their program, really high level. They're going to have information and links that I'll share in follow-up email with all of you. We're going to follow up their presentation with Q&A for after each presenter. And if you have questions while they're presenting, put them in the chat. We're going to keep track of them, and so sometimes the chat gets a little wild, and we'll get back to them after each presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our first presenters, Carol Grasis and Emily Armstrong with NRCS, to talk about the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. First, I got to switch.
Great. I can see
all set, Carol.
See the slides?
Yeah.
Gonna assume we got thumbs up there. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us. Emily and I are we work together on this presentation. We're going to sort of co-present. I'll take the first sort of introduction, and then Emily will jump into some more details at the end. So, next slide, please. Katie, can I advance or are you advancing? There we go. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with NRCS. I just wanted to just very briefly go over who is NRCS. We are, and I started right out with an acronym, so I apologize right there. This presentation, I try not to talk in acronyms, but they show up. So if anyone here's one that they don't understand, throw it in the chat and we can address it afterwards. But NRCS, we are the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We are an agency under the United States Department of Agriculture. And we do a lot of different things as an agency. But, we generate and manage and share data and technology and standards. We have many specialists, agronomists, foresters, engineers, soil scientists, all sorts of people and policymakers on staff that will help to provide technical support as well as to develop our programs. We have opportunities to interact with our participants and our producers, providing both technical and financial assistance. Our financial assistance is usually delivered through conservation programs directly to producers and other organizations like conservation districts and NGOs and other partners. And although we're a federal agency, we work locally, we work at the state level. So we have service centers in every state, and we provide one-on-one voluntary assistance to our producers, communities, and partners. So I am the Assistant State Conservationist for Programs in Connecticut. And as in that position, I oversee the financial assistance that goes out to our producers primarily and through partnerships to other organizations. And Emily serves in a similar function in New York. Emily, I don't know if there's anything different about your position that you wanted to say. I know, nope. I know maybe you covered
the same as you.
Okay. All right, next slide, please. So RCPP, and again, we jump right into an acronym. RCPP is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. This is a program that came about in the 2014 Farm Bill and was reinstituted in the 2018 Farm Bill in a slightly different format, but under the same name. So some of you may be familiar with the older version, but it was definitely revamped for 2018. And in the next Farm Bill, we'll have to wait and see what that looks like. But currently, RCPP is an overarching program with the goal of helping producers to protect working agricultural lands and forest lands. We work with partners who want to co-invest in these conservation activities. And these activities are typically going to be implemented on private or tribal agricultural land, forest land, or associated land. And then the agreement that we enter into with a partner is typically 5 years in length. So next slide. There's two types of RCPP opportunities that are available currently under the Farm Bill. And remember, this is all, what we have today, and what the next Farm Bill brings could be a different flavor, right? But for right now, there's two types of opportunities. There's the classic RCPP opportunity and the AFA, or that's the alternative funding arrangement. So I'm most familiar with the classic arrangement. In the classic arrangement, we enter into an agreement with a partner or partners, and we're able to, through that classic arrangement, develop contracts directly with producers for financial assistance activities. Those financial activities might be conservation practices, like a pollinator planting or forestry activities or cover crops, or it could be for easements. And there's several different kinds of easements that we can enter into through a classic RCPP. Through a classic RCPP, either the partner or NRCS can deliver technical assistance, that's the TA, in support of those producer contracts and easements. So the partner and NRCS are working together to help the producer to implement conservation or enroll in an easement. The partner's primary role is to provide the outreach, to measure impacts of the agreement and the conservation that's being done, and to deliver partner contributions that amplify the NRCS funding. Under an AFA, or the alternative funding arrangement, it's more hands-off for NRCS. Under these arrangements, there's a lot more flexibility. The partner takes the lead and does most of the work. The partner can directly install practices for producers, or they can reimburse producers for financial assistance contracts. They can actually essentially draft an agreement between the partner and a producer to implement, say, cover crop, and then the partner would pay the producer using NRCS funds that we funnel through the AFA. The partner under an AFA would deliver all the project technical assistance in support of producer contracts. All is probably a strong word in that bullet, because the next bullet down says that NRCS would still provide some limited support. There are some things that NRCS can never delegate to the partner, and that includes confirming eligibility of producers, such as adjusted gross income, that's that AGI, so the adjusted gross income, or highly erodible land eligibility, and then also compliance with NEPA, or the National Environmental Protection Act. So making sure that threatened and endangered species and other things that are protected under NEPA continue to be protected. Cultural resources is another big thing that NRCS would hold on to make sure that projects are going to comply with the laws and the regulations that provide the backbone for some of our programs. So the AFA is really more strongly driven by the partner, but NRCS is still involved to ensure that the regulations and statutes are protected and then followed, and then the funding would go from NRCS to the partner and then ultimately to the producer. Next slide, please. So a lot of times partners ask, they want to know, well, what can funds be used for? And our RCPP funds are fairly flexible, and they can be used directly to provide financial assistance for treatment of the resource concerns. So those would be payments directly to our producers. RCPP funds can also be used to pay partners to provide technical assistance. So this might be helping producers to enroll in the program, or going all the way to planning and designing the conservation activities that will be installed. Under RCPP, we can also pay partners to manage the project and do administrative work, as well as reporting outcomes at the end, because that's one of the things that we really want to look for in an RCPP project is ultimately we want to be able to have reportable outcomes. RCPP funds cannot be used for things like research or just to pay for a position in an organization. We can't fund startups for farms, and through RCPP, we can't pay indirect costs or overhead. So there are some restrictions on what that technical assistance can be used for, and it's always got to go towards actually implementing those conservation practices under the project. Next slide, please. So the important part about an RCPP is that it's the partnership, right? So the partnership is what's really going to make a project function, and having multiple partners or having experienced partners goes a long way towards having a successful RCPP. Strong partnerships can include things like community groups who have on-the-ground experience working with their local producers, organizations that have funds to support activities that RCPP funds can't be used for. Partners that are familiar with NRCS resource concerns and practices, because, as you've seen already at the beginning of my presentation, we use a lot of acronyms. Well, there's a lot of practices and enhancements and activities that underlie all of what the conservation that we're trying to get on the ground. And so each practice will have a very specific standard that needs to be followed. And so having a partner who's familiar with looking into these practices and understanding what resource concerns are and how they can be addressed will go a long way to getting you a strong partnership and a good RCPP. Having partners that have agricultural and conservation background is important. It might not be every partner, but having at least a few partners in your RCPP that can help you out with the technical and scientific background is going to help you out. And then having organizations with experience to manage federally funded projects. NRCS follows a lot of the same federal guidelines that other agencies will. And, there's a lot of paperwork and similar kinds of processes that need to be followed in order to get into an agreement and get funded and paid under the agreement and report progress. So having someone who's experienced with these kinds of projects is going to go a long way to helping your RCPP to get on the ground and stay on the path. Next slide, please. So RCPP under the 2018 Farm Bill no longer directly interacts with programs. In the old RCPP, we always talked about RCPP EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or RCPP CSP, which is Conservation Stewardship Program. We now lump all kinds of conservation activities that directly implement a practice or an activity, and we call that land management. Those land management activities take their authority from the covered programs. So we're allowed to do it because NRCS has the authority granted through the Farm Bill to EQIP and CSP. And so we do things that are similar, and we share things like practice standards and payments and things like that with those programs, but we don't have to follow all the rules of those programs. So in an RCPP, you'll hear us talk about land management contracts, and that's the purpose of those contracts are to provide treatment to restore or improve the land. We also have the ability to do a rental as part of the land management contract, and that takes its authority from the Conservation Reserve Program. And a rental aspect to that contract will provide a temporary it's a temporary contract for a rental, and it provides a payment based on foregone income. So if a producer agrees, for instance, to take the edge of their cornfield out of production and put it into a grass buffer, a rental portion of that contract might provide a per acre annual payment for the foregone income from losing that corn, because we're getting that benefit to habitat or water quality or something like that. We then have two different kinds of easements under RCPP. The US held easement is akin to like an ASEP, which is Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, wetland easement, or a Healthy Forest Reserve Program easement. It's permanent protection of the land. It can be on any land use. And so this is where the flexibilities come from RCPP, where in our other programs, a wetland reserve easement has to be primarily on wetlands, or a healthy forest reserve program has to be primarily on forest. Well, under a US held easement, we can enroll any land use or combinations of land use. And in that kind of easement, those rights are all held by the US of A, and NRCS is responsible for any restoration and management in the future, as well as the monitoring and stewardship of that easement. We also have the ability to do what's called an entity held easement, and those are going to be more similar to an ASEP ALE, which is an agricultural land easement. And there, NRCS is partnering with another organization or a unit of government to essentially cost share on the cost of that easement. Again, it provides permanent protection of the land. And under RCPP, we're not restricted to only cropland like we are in ASEP ALE, or primarily cropland like we are in ASEP ALE. We can do an entity held easement on any land use or combinations of land use. In those kinds of easements, the easement is then held by the entity, and the US, there's two options, may or may not have a right of enforcement. So there's different combinations within those two types of easements, and with levels of restriction and things like that. So there's a lot of flexibility and variety in both types of easements, and they each have sort of their own path for working through the agreement. And so the important thing to remember is in an RCPP, which is that overarching agreement, you could have any combination of these kinds of activities. You could just have land management, or you could offer just US held easements, or you could offer all of them if that's the goal of your RCPP. The last kind of authority is a watershed project. And I'm going to confess, I have zero experience. We haven't done any of those in Connecticut yet. But they're typically similar to the PL 566 program. And they are usually larger infrastructure projects that have a previously approved watershed plan and design. So I know in Connecticut, some of our old PL 566s were like major flood control kinds of operations, dams or levees and things like that. So that I think is probably less of a point that we would see covered under this kind of RCPP in New York or Connecticut. Next slide, please. So some of the other questions that we get asked frequently is the expectations for partner contributions. So there used to be an expectation that it would be a one-to-one match. that for every dollar NRCS put in to the agreement, that there would be some match in partner contribution equal. The statute changed with the 2018 Farm Bill to say that the partners will provide a significant portion of match. And what happens with that is that when these RCPP applications are accepted, they're ranked, and that is part of the ranking that is considered is how much contribution is being provided by the partner. But there is no one-to-one requirement or anything else like that. The only time we do have a requirement is for the entity held easements, where, again, because we're partnering with you to put an easement on another piece of property, typically the US portion is 50% of that purchase. The remainder 50% could come from the partner, or it could be a landowner donation, but typically the federal portion is only 50%. And then the partner contribution can be cash or in kind. So there's a lot of flexibility on that side. But we are looking to, again, this is not a grant. We are looking to leverage your funds and your in-kind services against ours for this partnership. Next slide. Additionally, the contributions can come from entities that don't qualify to lead an RCPP project. So you may have, you may choose to be the lead entity and have a variety of partners who agree to contribute a small amount, and maybe they don't qualify on their own, but they want to be a part of it, and so those contributions can come from a variety of sources. Additionally, some federal dollars can count as match. The strict rule is that we can't match other USDA funds, but most of the time, unless there's a restriction coming from the other source, we can accept their dollars as a contribution towards the RCPP. So finally, and again, this is under the 2018 Farm Bill. This was the variety of funding pools. So across the country, they have established these critical conservation areas. As you can see, New England is all one critical conservation area. That's the Northeast Forest and Waters area. And then there's a variety of other CCAs, or critical conservation areas, around the country. So there's two major funding pools. There's the state multi-state funding pool, and any partner or group of partners can apply for RCPP under the state multi-state funding pool. So even though the eastern portion of New York State is not under a CCA, they could apply under the state multi-state funding pool. Or if they wanted to be part of the Connecticut or Massachusetts area, then they could apply under the CCA. I believe, Emily, I don't think there's a rule that the whole RCPP has to be in the CCA, and we can check on that.
Yeah, I don't think that is a problem.
I think the critical part about the CCAs is that under the CCAs, the projects and the producer contracts or easements have to address at least one of the CCA specific priority resource concerns. So for example, in the Northeast Forest and Waters, our priority resource concerns are degraded plant condition, inadequate wildlife habitat, and water quality. So both the RCPP and every project would need to be addressing at least one of those. And so each CCA has a specific list of those. And then on the slide, which you'll be sent out later, it does have a link directly to the RCPP website for further information on the funding pools.
We have about 4 minutes before we have to, and we're going to bring on the second speaker. So I know you're not quite done with slides, but we have 4 minutes
That's
before.
okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I'll speed up. That's okay. Thanks, Carol. So, and I'm just going to continue. Everything that Carol said applies in New York. Back to that last slide, just to make it the CCA in New York is the Chesapeake Bay. So last year, any agreements that went through, what did they typically look like? So let's say that this was an RCPP. A typical $10 million one last year was that 25% of the overall agreement budget was for technical assistance. And that was split between what the partner would provide and what NRCS would do. And then the rest was the 75% financial assistance. And that was for getting the direct conservation activities on the ground, whether it be easements, rentals, land management. So that totaled our $10 million agreement. And the bottom should say this is over a 5-year agreement. So all that was over 5 years. That was a typical agreement from last year. Next slide. So with that typical agreement, what was the financial assistance used for? Again, it was for putting those conservation activities on the ground. That might be through our practices, through our enhancements, or through easements. Again, it's back to those 5 activity types that Carol discussed a little bit ago. And that a single project under the overarching agreement could propose any combination of those activity types. We have some that have easements tied with land management. So you put the easement on the land and then you also improve it at the same time. Could be part of an overall RCPP project. We manage that delivery generally through these classic projects with direct contracts between us and that eligible producer. We have not gotten into much of that alternative funding arrangement, which is more like a grant. Next slide, please. Then on the other side, that 25% that went to technical assistance, it's used to then oversee and help support that financial assistance from being put onto the ground. It comes into the regular implementation where perhaps the partner has the ability to do the design work, has the ability to plan those practices and then oversee them. And then there's the other part that supports the overall project management. Which may be where one of you would come in, especially if you're the lead partner, managing those reports, managing the timesheets, managing outreach. That's what we call the enhancement TA part of things. The amounts that would come in if you were to put up a proposal and then try for an agreement, these are estimates. If the award is done, if you get awarded one, then the payments are based on what is actually spent. You will submit timesheets and stuff or bills for reimbursement. That's what we would use for actual expenditures. And technical assistance is again used by both NRCS and the partner. NRCS uses it for those inherently governmental functions that we cannot delegate, or depending on how the proposal is written, sometimes NRCS does need to do more work. Maybe they have to do the design because the partner doesn't have an engineer on staff. It depends. Every agreement is different. Next slide, please. So some eligible activities just to help reinstate if you're ever interested in working with our CPP. So the eligible activities, again, are supporting those producer or contracts for the land rental or rental contracts. TA can be used to support the easements, whether it's entity held or U.S. government. Again, that's part of the implementation TA. Then the TA enhancement would be that management outreach. And then again, that all important outcomes assessment. What is ineligible for any TA is that administrative or indirect cost. And there are some examples of what that would mean. Next slide, please. So as you're thinking about one of these, if you were interested in getting into an RCPP, there's also things to consider from the get-go, which would be this producer and landowner eligibility. So next slide, please. So just to help you along, and then we said this is once an RCPP agreement is executed with that lead partner, we then have to decide, what's your ag producer or the forest landowner? And they can participate in the one of two ways. They can either, the producer can carry out the activities consistent with the project in that project's geographic area. And we may not have stated that earlier, but all RCPP projects will have to have that defined area, whether it's the whole state boundary, part of that critical conservation area, a specific watershed, perhaps it's multi-state. Maybe it's a project between Connecticut and New York. But the producers would ultimately need to be in that project's geographic area. or producers can engage with the partner and then delegate a willing partner to act as their representative in working with NRCS. So maybe the producers don't directly work with NRCS and they would work through that partner. That tends to happen more with one of those alternative funding arrangements. Next slide, please. Another important part to note is that these projects have to be carried out on agriculture or what we call non-industrial private forest land, or if it's associated with one of those two. So we don't do projects on developed land, houses, farmsteads usually, although farmsteads can fall under agricultural. So we are looking to achieve a conservation benefit, so an improvement of the natural resource in some fashion. That's why it comes back to having that strong knowledge of what a natural resource, what we're going to benefit and which practices would benefit that particular resource concern. And overall, as if you're thinking about these, that it needs to be private land. Public lands can be brought in if it's being in conjunction right with that private land, but generally speaking, it does need to be all private land. Like, for example, we couldn't do a project on a town park or perhaps some land that a town owns. So, and that has stopped a couple projects along the way. So I wanted to make sure we pointed that out. So, and I believe that is my last slide. There is more information here, which when these come out, like Carol had said, there are direct links. This would be how to apply for an RCPP. If you are thinking about one, the next slide is the question slide if you want to advance to Katie. But if you do think about an RCPP, I know there's no notice of funding opportunity out yet, but these are not things to consider that you can drop and do in 1 month. These are things definitely to work on over time to get those things in order for your proposals. And both Carol and I usually take questions from the partner about the agreement well in advance of when it actually gets put in. So any other questions for either of us?
We're actually over time, so I'm going to tell folks to, before we got to get there, we have 3 more presentations.
Yep. No,
thank you so much. This is really helpful, and I will encourage anyone that does have a question, please put it in the chat. We'll copy it over, and maybe we can get it over to you, Emily and Carol. I know that there's been several RCPs who've had successful RCPP projects, so if there is interest, particularly in this program, we can have another call with H2H partners. So don't worry about that.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing there. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, John. There you are. Hi, John. John Peterson. He's the director of the Network for Landscape Conservation, and he's going to talk to us about the Network for Landscape Conservation's Catalyst Fund.
Thanks so much, Katie. And really wonderful to be on with everyone today. I'm assuming folks are seeing the slide deck. Is that looking good? Yeah, thanks, Katie. Yep. Fantastic. My name is John Peterson. As Katie said, I'm the director of the Network for Landscape Conservation. I'm actually, NLC is a national network, but I'm based in New England. So it's always nice to be on calls with New England folks. So I'm based in Western Massachusetts. And really excited to be able to talk a little bit about the Catalyst Fund. And I'm going to pick up on something that Emily was saying just as she was finishing up, that you can't do these projects in a month, right? You can't put together an RCPP in a month. And so as I think about the Catalyst Fund and what I want to share with the Catalyst Fund is, are folks seeing a quote on this slide, or is it just a picture? No quote. It's
just
the nice
picture. Yeah.
Let me just bear with me 1 second. For some reason, sometimes there's the quote. All right, sorry about that. Sometimes my slides get a little wonky when I'm screen sharing. But what I wanted to do was start with this quote, which I think is, when I think about the Catalyst Fund, this is really the essence of where the Catalyst Fund emerged from, which is the frustration that's expressed in this quote, which was from one of our inaugural Catalyst Fund grantees in 2019. As we've sort of moved into the field and practice of landscape conservation and stewardship, it's really become increasingly clear that to be successful in working at a landscape scale, that's really predicated on collaboration, working across those boundaries on issues that really transcend the capacity of any single organization or entity to address on their own. And yet, even as we've increasingly recognized the critical, essential role of collaboration, there's very little dedicated funding available for investments specifically in collaboration. And to Emily's point, right, a really exciting, innovative, impactful RCPP doesn't come together in 1 month. The reality is it takes a tremendous amount of time, energy, effort, resource, in other words, to build and sustain collaboration over time. So I really think of this quote as reflective of what I think of as a collaboration disconnect. And so again, that's really where the Catalyst Fund emerged from. We launched the Catalyst Fund 6 years ago now in 2019. And it was really focused on and continues to be focused on providing resources to landscape partnerships to enable them to invest in coordination capacity and collaborative processes. A key point really is that the focus is landscape partnerships, and so we're really targeting those entities that are bringing together large groups of partners to work together over time in an enduring fashion, really to co-create vision together for what they want their landscape to look like and be like in the future, and then to work together to realize that vision and work towards shared goals. The Catalyst Fund is premised on making these strategic investments and strengthening the collaborative capacity of these place-based, community-grounded landscape partnerships. And the logic, the rationale is that really by investing in the collaborative capacity, by catalyzing growth and development of these partnerships and the collaborative processes that are holding these partners together, we can better position these partnerships to be successful in achieving their long-term conservation and stewardship outcomes over the long term. The Catalyst Fund is a regrant program, and so the original funding emerges from the Doris Duke Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. So again, the premise of the Catalyst Fund is really that it does take a tremendous amount of time, energy, and effort to build and sustain collaboration. And we spend a lot of time thinking about, what does it actually take to support effective collaboration? And so I wanted to take a little bit of a tangent and dig into this concept of collaborative capacity for a moment, because it really is at the heart of the Catalyst Fund. What are those elements that allow groups of partners to come together and really work effectively together across organizational boundaries towards shared purpose or shared goal? And the diagram you see on this screen emerges from a framework that colleagues in California, the California Landscape Stewardship Network, have really articulated nicely in that we use in the Catalyst Fund. And the framework is premised on 6 structural elements of collaborative capacity. Those are the words inside the triangle, and then 3 binding elements of collaborative capacity, and those are the pieces that form the legs of the triangles. And so as we think about collaborative capacity, and this really is at the heart of what the Catalyst Fund supports, we're talking about elements like coordination capacity, that basic staffing support, and that coordination glue that holds together partners and communication and logistics and all of that hard work that goes into just coordinating across organizations. With systems and infrastructure, what are those basic operational and communication structures that allow for that internal connectivity, alignment, and information flow across partners. That's really critical for effective collaboration. Decision-making structures. Partnerships really, they exist and operate in the space between organizations. And so there's critical need to have really transparent, clear, commonly understood pathways for reaching decisions. And again, that's critical for effective collaboration. Collaborative practices, skills, and tools, again, because this is operating in the space between organizations, it really requires a unique skill set that differs from what many of us have traditionally been called upon to develop and use in our work. So what are those skills, knowledges, tools that allow us to be really effective in moving in those spaces outside of organizational hierarchies? Shared strategies and priorities, again, being really clear on what those partners are working towards and what they're going to do together. And then finally, collective purpose and goals, really making sure there's clarity and shared understanding on that North Star or the animating purpose, if you will, of what's holding partners together. And again, those are, again, what we think of those structural elements of collaborative capacity. But what's so powerful, I think, about this framework and why we use it is recognizing, yeah, having those in place is really helpful. But it requires something above and beyond that to really make partnerships come alive and really flourish and thrive. And so what are those less concrete qualities that really need to be embodied if a collaborative is really going to take flight? And that's what's captured in these binding elements of collaborative capacity. So you have that collaborative mindset, really that notion of having a shared commitment to working collaboratively, and a depth of knowledge and understanding around the unique opportunities and also the unique challenges of doing that. Inclusive culture, really building that common sense of belonging across partners, and the ability to value and weave together all voices and perspectives within a landscape. And finally, meaningful relationships, really that opportunity to recognize and celebrate the way in which we are individuals and coming to this work together in hopes of finding a shared future. So anyway, a tangent there into thinking about what are those elements that are really critical for supporting effective collaboration. And when I talk about this model and this framework, when I use it, I often use the metaphor of a keyhole. And so when those structural elements are resourced and developed, and when those binding elements are really attended to and intentionally cultivated, a whole suite of partners can come together and move and turn in lockstep in a way that allows you to unlock the door towards a lot of the outcomes that we're all striving for on our landscapes, and the outcomes that we know are essential to building better futures for our lands and waters and for our communities. So again, that's at the heart of the Catalyst Fund, this notion of collaborative capacity, being intentional about what is needed to support effective collaboration over the long term, and trying to drive resources that allow groups of partners to invest in strengthening and supporting these elements of collaborative capacity. So moving beyond sort of some of the more conceptual underpinnings of the Catalyst Fund and maybe getting more into the nuts and bolts and logistics of the Catalyst Fund. The Catalyst Fund is a national regranting program, and we have an annual grant cycle, and the 2025 grant cycle is fast approaching. We're on track to release the RFP in middle of this month. And we'll have a 9-week submission window with proposals due in middle of May. We anticipate having $400,000 in regranting funds available this year, which would translate to 16 to 17 different grant awards to support different landscape partnerships. Those grant awards can be requested as 1-year or 2-year requests for a total of up to $25,000 across those 1 or 2 years. Applicants must be a 501c3 organization. The only thing I would say there is, again, just recognizing the uniqueness of landscape partnerships. They often, earlier I said they operate in the space between organizations. That's very often the case and has been our experience in funding these. So many, and perhaps even most of our grant awards are to 501c3 organizations that are applying on behalf of a landscape partnership, either a host partner, a formal fiscal sponsor, or just a core partner of the organization submits the proposal on behalf of the partnership. We do have a 1-to-1 match requirement, and 50% of that match needs to be a cash match. One thing that we're super excited about, and will be a nice segue, I think, to Hallie in a few moments, is that we've been connecting with our colleagues at the Land Trust Alliance and Open Space Institute and thinking about the ways in which the Catalyst Fund and the Land and Climate Grant Program are connected and aligned, and the potential for leveraging one another. And so we are piloting for this 2025 grant cycle an opportunity for landscape partnerships to submit a Catalyst Fund grant request that includes an additional grant request to the Land and Climate Grant Program. And more details will be offered on that. And I'm not sure, maybe I won't say too much on that and let Hallie speak to more details, but this would be separate and additional to the Catalyst Fund grant. So it would essentially be 2 separate grant requests streamlined through one application process. The review process will be independent, and a decision to apply for a Catalyst Fund grant won't improve or hinder your ability to also secure that Catalyst Fund grant. But again, because we see such alignment between these 2 programs, we wanted to experiment with bringing them together in some fashion this year. So that will be really exciting. The one thing I'll note with the Land and Climate Grant Program, and Hallie probably will speak to this much more cogently than I will, a LTA member land trust will need to be part of the proposal to secure that additional Land and Climate Grant Award. And that land trust does not need to be the same entity that submits the proposal for Catalyst Fund support. So we anticipate a lot of questions there, and we'll be happy to be responsive and help folks navigate through any questions. Katie, before I hand it back to you, I just wanted to highlight maybe 2 last pieces of the Catalyst Fund. One is I get super excited about the regranting of the Catalyst Fund, but I get even more excited about the peer learning component of the Catalyst Fund, and this is the high point of my work, and has been so over the last 6 years. Every year we convene funded partnerships into a peer learning cohort. And this may sound very familiar with folks in the RCP network, but what we found is the work of coordinating landscape partnerships is really complex, challenging work, and building and stewarding collaboration over time is really, really challenging. And it does really require a differing skill set than what many of us have developed in our careers to date. And so there is such opportunity for people that are not connected geographically and are working on differing issues and challenges in their own unique geographies and contexts, still to come together and find those threads of commonality, and to be able to be in dialogue with others that viscerally know and understand the joys and frustrations of doing collaborative work. And so we do have a peer learning component with the Catalyst Fund. So in addition to the $25,000 grant request you can make, successful proposals do have an opportunity to join a peer learning cohort. And where I wanted to end, and then I'll just pass it back to you, Katie, is just this reflection on geography. And across 6 grant cycles now, I think there was supposed to be more text, maybe not. Across 6 grant cycles, we've now made 85 Catalyst Fund grant awards. And just sharing this to recognize, and again, this is not news to any of you, I'm sure, but you all here in the H2H partnership are really part of this growing movement of landscape partnerships working across the country. It is an incredibly inspiring and powerful movement of folks that are connected to place and feel deeply rooted to the power of place and the power of home, and are committed to seeking out better futures for those lands and waters and communities that you care about. And so it's been super powerful to be able to become better connected to this movement over these last 6 years. And I'll wrap up there, Katie, and turn it back to you.
Thanks, John. Awesome. Yeah, partners, H2H partners, this is invited John because I knew about the Catalyst Fund and there have been many RCPs in the network who've been recipients. We can also host another call with some of them to hear about their projects and experiences. And with the spirit of some of the grant cycles and grant programs you're going to hear about, applications open in the fall. John mentioned his is mid-March. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't do that, with thinking of some conservation planning and visioning we might be doing this year, with the, eye toward learning about these programs that we might be interested in seeking out next year. And certainly this was strategic timing to if we were interested in other programs whose grant cycle starts later in the year, we could think about some kind of collaborative project. But I'd love to open any questions. We have plenty of time for a few questions. If there's anyone you want to raise your hand or just unmute. Are there any, invited a couple of other RCP folks who may have been part of a catalyst or a recipient of a catalyst grant. I don't know if they're on the call though. Well, there's plenty of time. If you come up with a question, think of something. Certainly while we're on the call, post it in the chat, or I don't know if John, if you're staying on, if you can answer it, or we can get it out to you after the call. But thank you again. That was great.
Yeah, my pleasure. And happy to, if any questions emerge, happy to be in touch with anyone via email too, Katie.
Oh yeah, if you want to throw your
Yeah.
email address, yeah. Great, thank you. So our third speaker, Hallie Schwab from the Open Space Institute, is going to talk to us about the Land and Climate Grant Program. And some of you may remember, I'm sure remember, we've been involved in H2H. She was a previous H2H coordinator in her time at Husted. Get away, Hallie.
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really fun to see some familiar names on the call, and I'm just really thrilled to be with you today to talk about the Land and Climate Grant Program. Again, for those of you I don't know, my name is Hallie Schwab, and I'm the Conservation Planning Manager at Open Space Institute. Let me make this full screen. Oh, here we go. So the Land and Climate Grant Program is a joint initiative of Open Space Institute and the Land Trust Alliance. And I'd like to just call out my close partner in administering the program over at the Alliance, Kelly Watkinson, who's the Land and Climate Program Director. And since 2013, the two organizations have awarded over 180 grants to support organizations nationwide, supporting climate-aligned planning and communications. We've also hosted workshops and trainings reaching thousands of practitioners and collaborated on guidance documents that translate science for conservation practice. Climate change impacts nearly every aspect of our work as conservation organizations. And the land-based work that we do can be a critical part of the solution. And so the goal of the Land and Climate Grant Program is to provide support that strengthens the capacity of groups that protect and steward land to integrate climate change considerations into their decision-making. And we tend to think about this work through three primary lenses. First is work that bolsters the resilience of species and biodiversity, as well as human communities. We also think about efforts to mitigate atmospheric carbon through a range of land-based approaches, and work that supports the adaptation to climate impacts, such as stronger storms, flooding, drought, fire, and heat. The Land and Climate Grant Program seeks to move the needle by providing support for climate-informed planning. So this funding can support a wide range of activities under sort of the broad banner of planning. But what we're really looking for is projects that result in one or more of the following deliverables. So that could be a land protection plan, identifying priorities or targets for land protection that will support climate adaptation or mitigation, land stewardship or management plans that lay out practices for climate adaptive land care, climate communications plans that sort of lay out strategies for sharing climate messages or communicating about the organization's climate work with key audiences. And also support for renewable energy siting plans. So that could take a number of forms, but we've seen groups develop a decision matrix or policies that guide engagement with renewable energy siting. And that could be on conservation lands or across sort of a broader service area. So we anticipate that the request for proposals for the 2025 grant round will be released this spring, likely late April or May, and that applicants will be notified about award decisions by September, so the fall. There is some flexibility in the grant term, but generally we like to see projects start by the end of the year, so start in 2025 and be completed within a one-year time frame. Applicants can request grants in amounts between $5,000 and $15,000, and there is no formal match requirement. We're also pleased to provide grantees with access to climate-informed planning technical support during the grant term via a help desk. And so the way this is set up is that any groups that receive awards can reach out, set up an individualized consultation with a technical assistance provider at Open Space Institute. And you can get support with things like setting goals, selecting appropriate climate data sets, designing your analyses, interpreting and communicating results. So, think of us as sort of another layer of support to work through issues and challenges as you're developing your project. And I think Katie said that there'll be an opportunity to share these slides kind of in another form afterwards. So I've included the fund website in a couple of places throughout this presentation, but that is where to go for information about past grant rounds. And once it's announced, the new request for proposals will be available on the Land Trust Alliance's website. So let's get into some of the key details around eligibility, and this is what John was alluding to in his remarks around that partnership, that integration opportunity with the Catalyst Fund. But in the 2025 Land and Climate Grant Round, grants will be administered by the Land Trust Alliance, and so applicants will need to either be a Land Trust Alliance member land trust or an affiliate member state land trust association. Applicants must have had their 501c3 status for at least 2 years, or in the case of an affiliate member state land trust, have an established fiduciary meeting this qualification. The Land Trust Alliance does give preference to accredited land trusts and organizations with a board-approved plan to pursue accreditation. And, I'll just note here, we welcome and encourage applications from partnerships. So as long as there is an eligible entity to serve as the grant recipient, you should be all set. In terms of the fund geography, this year we are accepting proposals from groups nationwide. The grants can be used to cover costs associated with the development of strategic conservation plans or land management plans, or to develop internal policies, procedures, and communications in support of this work. Eligible costs include, but are not limited to, staff time, and I'll include, when we talk about staff time, that could also take the form of, stipends for partners or other folks who are sort of contributing their time to the development of a plan, as well as travel, project consultants, things like graphic design, printing, and mailing. But it's not limited to these categories. You can also include indirect costs up to 15% of the grant request. And sort of on the other side here, the grants are not intended to be used for general operating support, research that's not directly related to the conservation planning or management project described in the application. They can't be used for land acquisition, development of carbon offset projects, or lobbying. So just to give a sense of how proposals are evaluated, we have the following criteria that are applied to each of the proposals that we review. And the first is project impact. And here we really want to understand how the project will inform conservation decisions such as land protection or stewardship, and where relevant, how the project will leverage funding for these activities. We also think about impact in terms of scale. So if your project doesn't cover a broad geographic region, it's helpful if you can show how the project could serve as a model or a demonstration, or how it will influence the way your organization or partnership will operate beyond the life of the project. The next is audience. And here reviewers are looking to see that the project has a clearly defined audience for the plan or recommendations. We don't want to fund plans that will just sort of sit on a shelf. And so we're interested in seeing that your intended audiences have the commitment or resources or plans to really implement. For methods and use of science, we're looking for proposals to clearly identify information sources, methods, and steps that will be used to achieve the desired outcomes. And we consider feasibility by looking to see that the project team has the capacity, expertise, and commitment to complete the project, and that the project is achievable during the proposed timeframe. Finally, we have a criteria related to community benefit, which is evaluated in terms of the project's contribution to strengthening resilience in communities facing climate threats, or in addressing the inequitable burdens of climate impacts. There are many resources available on the fund webpage to help applicants think through possible projects and explore climate data and tools that can be used to inform proposals. I'll note that the fund does not require the use of the specific climate data set or approach, but we've highlighted a number of science and planning resources on the fund page that may be useful for you to consider as you're developing a project. And I'll add that, the the technical assistance providers are pretty well versed in some of these tools. And so that's, again, another resource for groups that receive grants to maybe get some support in utilizing some of this data in their work. We also, on the fund webpage, have a growing collection of plans and communication projects that have been developed by past grantees. Could be a great resource if you're looking for inspiration. And finally, this is something that's relatively new. We're still building it out, but we've developed a database, an interactive map that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. And you can sort of click around and read about past climate-informed planning projects that have been funded by OSI and the Alliance. And I included a QR code there if you want to take a look at that. But what I'd like to do now to make this a little bit more real is to offer just a few examples of past projects that have been led by collaboratives that illustrate some pretty different approaches to climate-informed planning and the type of work that might be possible through this funding opportunity. And so the first comes from Sudbury Valley Trustees, which received a grant in 2021 to work with members of the Metro West Conservation Alliance, which is a regional conservation partnership covering the 36 towns of Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord River watersheds in eastern Massachusetts. And the purpose of this grant was really to develop a strategic conservation plan for their service area. The project analyzed and mapped a range of climate data sets related to priorities identified by municipal leaders and local partners. And the resulting plan identifies places where land protection and restoration could contribute to climate resilience, forest carbon storage and sequestration, flood mitigation, community conservation priorities, and farmland preservation. And the collaborative developed some really incredible sort of products in association with this map. They had a story map that led viewers sort of through the process and the resulting plans. And they also developed an interactive mapping tool that can be used by partners and decision makers across the region to inform planning. The next example comes from Cold Hollow, Canada, which is a regional conservation partnership in Vermont's northern Green Mountains. Cold Hollow, Canada used their grant to expand their successful woodlots program to 4 new towns in Vermont's northern. Again, they're working in this region, across multi-town region in northern Vermont, and the program brings together cohorts of neighboring landowners to learn together about climate smart forest stewardship. And so participants engaged in field-based workshops with peers and received individual climate change assessments of their property, identifying strategies for habitat resilience and carbon sequestration, such as some of the examples you see on the slide here, such as enhancing the complexity of forest structure to buffer against the impacts of climate disturbance. I'll just share one more example, which is a different approach from the folks at Friends of the Mad River, who are working with members of the 5-town Ridge to River Coalition to develop a community-informed watershed action framework focused on flood resilience in Vermont's Mad River watershed. And with support from the Land and Climate Grant, the coalition has been hosting community conversations around flood resilience and recovery since the region experienced devastating floods over the past 2 summers. And they're also convening local decision makers and partners to identify regional needs, map social networks and capacity across the 5-town region, and identify strategies to increase community resilience to flooding and other climate impacts. And so to wrap up, I'll just offer a few words of guidance on some of the things that we've found really contribute to crafting a strong proposal. And so, the first is that we really want to know how the project will impact the way you operate and go about your work on an ongoing basis. So where you can, be sure to highlight what will be different in your work from adding a climate lens. Proposals for like a one-off project will be less competitive, and the emphasis really is on planning as opposed to implementation. Where relevant, tell us how your proposal builds on past efforts, and be sure to highlight any potential for the project to help catalyze funding or secure additional resources for your work. As I mentioned, individual organizations are eligible to apply for grants, but kind of in the spirit of this forum today, I just want to emphasize that collaborative projects undertaken by multiple organizations are often really competitive and viewed as a way of sort of deepening impact. And so we love to see that come through in the proposals. And finally, I want to come back to this this piece about, community informed planning and community benefit. We really want to know how you plan to engage with or seek input from community members, including individuals with deep connection to the land and impacted by climate change. So I will wrap up here and just close with a reminder that the request for proposals will be announced in spring of 2025. Information when available will be on the Land Trust Alliance Fund website. And I've included my contact as well as contact of my colleague, Hallie Watkinson at the Land Trust Alliance. Please feel welcome to reach out to either of us. And if there's time, I'm glad to answer questions now. Thanks.
Thanks, Hallie. We do have time for questions. And I actually want to make a little plug too, because I didn't realize Cold Hollow to Canada had received a grant. Their woodlots program, I know one of their original sources of funding to develop it was landscape scale restoration grant, U.S. Forest Service, LSR for short, which we are going to talk about next week. Yeah, March 13th at our part 2 meeting. So that's really cool to see that support of their expansion. But yeah, I would love to open it up. Any questions? Don't be shy. You can just unmute if you have one. That's a lot of information. You organize it so well too. So if it's okay, we definitely will share slides. Give another minute here. Anyone? If you're a percolator like me, you're thinking and thinking. Come up with a question at like 10 o'clock tonight. But it's really great to have those examples too, Hallie. So thank you for sharing those with other RCPs in the network in the area. That kind of really grounds it with what kind of project be eligible. Right. I think we'll go on to our last speaker for today. Thanks, Hallie. Thank you again. All right. So it's my pleasure to introduce Yao Darko, the Director of Grants and Programs at the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. And he's going to talk to us about a few different programs for Connecticut partners.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Yao.
Can you see my screen?
Looks good.
All right, perfect. Good afternoon. Thank you all for having me. My name is Yao, and I serve as the Director of Grants and Programs at the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. I will be providing an overview of our grant programs designed to support land conservation efforts across Connecticut. A bit about the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, or CLCC for short. We are the umbrella organization for Connecticut's land conservation community. Our mission is to elevate and strengthen land conservation in Connecticut. Our work includes providing technical and financial support to land trusts, convening the conservation community through networking and collaborative programs, advocating for conservation policies and funding, and promoting community-centered conservation initiatives. So in the next few slides, we will cover the following 4 grant programs, which can help land trusts initiate new acquisition projects all the way to stewarding that project once acquired. The first 2 grant programs, the Land Capital Grants and the CT Conservation Partnership Program, are geared towards acquisitions. Our transaction grants support due diligence costs, and our Climate Smart grants support climate smart stewardship practices. For each grant, I will cover the purpose, the eligible applicants and projects, award size, and the application process. And we will start with our Land Capital Grants. So the Land Capital Grants Program provides grants for land and conservation easement acquisitions. Eligible applicants are CLCC member land trusts. Eligible projects must be located within Connecticut, although we may consider multi-state projects as long as the project is predominantly in Connecticut. Projects must entail permanent protection of land, either through fee simple ownership by a land trust, to a permanent conservation easement, or a pass-through to a partner entity with a mission to permanently protect land. All projects must close within 12 months or less of their grant award notification. And projects should demonstrate strong biodiversity benefits, connectivity to other conserved lands, climate resilience, and community impact. Awards range from a minimum of $50,000 up to a maximum of $500,000, or 30% of a project's appraised value, whichever is lesser. And applications are by invitation only. What that means is that if you have a project that you are seeking funding for and that you anticipate closing within 12 months or less, you just sending me an email or giving me a phone call, and you have a conversation as to how that project fits within this grant program. And applications are accepted bi-monthly beginning March 1st, 2025. So our first deadline passed until funds are fully allocated. So the next grant program is the Connecticut Conservation Partnership Program, which is funded by the USDA NRCS. So it is part of the Regional Conservation Partnership Program that Carol discussed earlier on. And the purpose of the Connecticut Conservation Partnership Program is to fund the purchase of conservation easements to be held by NRCS or by an eligible entity. And eligible applicants are CT land trusts and the landowners that they may be working with. Eligible projects must involve non-industrial private forests, watershed lands, and agricultural lands. And the projects must contribute to freshwater and inland wetland protection, avoiding forest conversion, protecting wildlife habitat, providing recreational opportunities, and sequestering and storing greenhouse gases. So there are 2 easement options under this program, U.S.-held easements and entity-held easements. And U.S.-held easements are easements acquired, held, and stewarded by the U.S. through the NRCS. Entity-held easements are easements acquired, held, and stewarded by an eligible entity, in the case of this program, a land trust. And award sizes are determined by the easement option that a land trust or a landowner chooses, the easement's level of restriction, and the easement's appraised value. For U.S.-held easements, landowners can expect anywhere to receive between 75 to 100% of the easement's value. For entity-held easements, there is a 25 to 50% cost share between the entity and NRCS. And the application process requires a bit of coordination between CLCC and NRCS. And so if you are a land trust or a landowner interested in this program, you would first complete a project intake form, which I will walk you through. Once that project intake form is completed, I will collect additional documentation from the land trust or the landowner and send that information off to NRCS. I'll badge that with other application. send that off to NRCS. Then NRCS will do their preliminary reviews of the application, and if they seek to move forward with it, then they begin the process of contacting the landowner and working through the easement acquisition phase. Our next program is the Transaction Assistance Grant Program, which provide grants to land trusts for transaction-related project expenses. And these costs can include appraisals, surveys, title work, environmental assessments, and recording fees. This program, however, does not fund legal fees, staff time and salaries, stewardship costs or endowments, management plans, or baseline documentation reports. So eligible applicants to this program are CLCC members that will hold a conservation interest in the project, whether that is through holding a conservation easement or holding title to the property. And projects can be a purchase, bargain, sale, or donation of any conservation easement or fee property. Applicants can receive up to $20,000 in funding through this program. And for the application process, applications are accepted at the end of each month, but expenses may not be incurred before the monthly submission deadline. So if you anticipate putting in an application at the end of March and starting your appraisal, you would start your appraisal, whatever due diligence transaction that you are doing the following month. We don't want to, so this is not necessarily a reimbursement program, so we want you to come to us before you even complete your transaction. And the last grant program is our Climate Smart Land Stewardship Grant Program, which provides funding for planning and implementation grants to increase the capacity of land trusts to manage their lands using climate smart land stewardship practices. And climate smart refers to the ability to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, build resilience on conserved lands, and adapt conserved lands to the impacts of a changing climate. Eligible program applicants, again, include CLCC members, and they must hold a conservation easement in the project. Eligible projects can include the creation of management plans, forest stand improvements such as patch cuts or thinning, agricultural cover cropping, the creation or establishment of pollinator meadows, and habitat restoration projects. For implementation projects, these projects must demonstrate contribution to climate mitigation, adaptation, or resilience. For this program, awards range from up to $8,000 for planning grants and up to $50,000 for implementation grants. In terms of the application process, applications are accepted twice per year. For this year, February 1st and May 1st. And through this program, we offer technical assistance, which is available through our Climate Smart Stewardship Coordinator. So if you're interested in this program, either the planning or implementation grants, you would contact our Climate Smart Coordinator, and he will essentially walk you through the application process and how to develop your project in a way so that you can be fully funded. And that is the end of the presentation. These slides, Katie, you have a version of this that you can send to our folks, and you can use these links to learn more about the program, but also on the CLCC website, we do have our other grants opportunities page, which is continually updated to include different grant programs, either state, federal, or foundation funding. And if there are any questions, I have my email and my cell number here.